everyone. My name's Katie Brown. I am a business partner from Queensland. We only got one region in Queensland, but it's okay. We're slowly getting over it. And my esteemed colleague, Krisitn Gnomes, or Gomez, I believe is the correct pronunciation. Krisitn works at our head office, and your title is?
Operations Manager.
So we were both on the National Forum Working Party for today, and we were tasked with presenting the data that's come out of the Reform Ready reviews for you. So we decided to go with the theme, The Big Bang Theory. Have any of you here, please, God, watched the show before? Because, yay! Oh, this won't be lost on you. So those people that had their hands up, they're your interpreters at your table. If you don't understand what we're talking about, just turn to them and go, what the? So Dr. Sheldon Cooper is a high-functioning Asperger's syndrome PhD nuclear physicist, and so he's our patron saint for everything that we do today. And one of his sayings, you'll learn a few of them through our presentation, but one of his sayings is, oh, what fresh hell is this? And as I have spoken to aged care providers in my region, there's a sense that for those of them that are veterans, that have been in the industry, can you hear me? Sorry, I realise I'm not talking into the mic. Those who are veterans in the industry have weathered similar storms before, but I think this is same but a little bit different. And so the Big Bang Theory is about the beginning of a new universe as we know it, and that's reform. And so that's our link to God. I hope you understand why we picked it. But there'll be some little moments through this, and you are going to learn a new word to help with your neuroplasticity as we go through the presentation. I'm here for support. Krisitn's going to take you through a lot of the slides. I may jump in and do something stupid, so here we go.
Okay. Since I'm the process person, I have the sexy job of building all of this. I thought I would start out by giving you guys some background about how we set up the process that you went through and the context in which it was set up. So most of you probably know of or have heard of Enterprise Connect. The Reform Ready review process was modeled off the services that Enterprise Connect deliver in the manufacturing sector, but contextualized for aged care. The Reform Ready review is not an audit. For those of you who have been through this, you know that, but that was a message that we were trying to get across very early and make very clear. And it's not a standalone tool either. It's a process. It involves close collaboration between the business partners and the individual enterprises to undertake a business review across 13 priority areas that we identified as being critical within the context of reform. It can and often does involve inputs from multiple levels within an organization, from volunteers up to the board of directors, to get the full spectrum. And the process itself is tailored by the BP to suit the needs of an organization, so it can often vary between providers and also between regions. If you asked Katie how she undertook the review process for Comlink versus Jan, who undertook it for, I don't know, another provider off the top of my head, they'll give you completely different descriptions. But having said that, there is an overarching framework for the process that is carried out by the BPs in each region, just for quality control, for my sanity, for the national office's sanity. And these boxes here are sort of capturing the overarching framework that they work in. So in essence, we started with going into the region, identifying the business partner, having an information session, inviting stakeholders, describing what was available, and then collecting expressions of interest. We had criteria established for those that applied and wanted a review, and then the business partner culled that down to 20 because that's what we were, that was our target number in each region. And from there, the business partner would engage with typically the CEO or a manager to have the initial discussion, to talk about what their expectations were for the review, to show them the tool, which we'll give you a snapshot of, let them feel it, look at it, ask questions, just get comfortable with it. And then there is a time usually set up where they would come back and they would complete the tool together. So the tool is a questionnaire. Many of you have seen, this is the first front page of the questionnaire describing what it is, what the purpose of it, the tool is, what will be the outputs of this and what we'll use it for. And just to give you a bit of background on the development of the tool, it was developed by an external consultant that was also a director on an aged care facility, or director for aged care, Presbyterian aged care, I believe it was. So he brought in a lot of expertise and knowledge in the development of this tool. It was brought to the team and went through workshopping with the team, and then also sent out to industry for additional consultation before it was finalized. So it was well received when we began using it. But this is the tool itself. It's a questionnaire with 13 key priority areas, a total of 56 questions, 50 of which are quantitative, or you're scoring yourself with a weighted scale, and 6 open-ended. So we do have a mix of both. The business partner goes out, facilitates completion of this questionnaire. Here's the rankings that for each question, the person completing the questionnaire chooses. So in an area like senior leadership, if there's a question around senior leadership, they feel they're doing really great in that area, they usually choose a 5. If there's still a bit of work that needs to be done, but they've already started, a 3, and you get the point. We also have workforce data that we collect and financial data that we collect that rounds out the full review for the organization. So the business partner and the contact person, the CEO, work together to complete the questionnaire. Sometimes they can undertake some additional staff interviews, focus group discussions to add meaning to the numbers and to get a richer score, and maybe challenge some of the scores that are in the early reports. Come in and they input that into SurveyMonkey, and then we spit out what is basically the questionnaire with every single score that they have, and then an overall benchmarking score for each section, and it's in this index. And this typically is what they're most interested in when looking at how they did overall. And the business partner will typically go back and present this to the CEO and say, this is what you've self-assessed, what do you think? And discussion can take place. Sometimes some modifications can happen to the document. Maybe they're not so happy with one of the sections, maybe upon further reflection, they'd like to change a score. We can do a bit of adjusting, and then this is included within their final report.
Especially if it's going to a board, sometimes
Yeah.
the scores, could be political suicide, some of them, if they don't, change the scores.
So in terms of trying to interpret very quickly what is on this benchmarking index, for example, in the priority area of governance, this particular organization has scored itself or self-assessed itself at 30%. There's 4 questions in that particular category, total points 20. I think this would give the organization a score of 6. So they've scored themselves 6 out of 20, which really means they're giving themselves a 1.5, or basically, we haven't really thought about that, and
or we need to do some board development because it's governance.
Yeah. So it's not a great score, but it's on their radar, and so that's what those scores mean. And then conversion to final report. Oh, sorry. So that was a long slide. So to date, this is as of March 25th, we've done 192 reviews. And this is what the data is based on that we're going to break down. So overall, nationally, those participating in this program have given themselves a score of 47%. So not a great level of confidence being expressed across the providers participating in the WIN program across all priority areas. In terms of our reach between metro, regional, rural, remote, we're pretty even. So nearly 50% regional, rural, remote, and the other 50% coming into the metro region. So we've got a good spread. This is our national trend line. So for each priority area, this is basically how we're benchmarking to date across all the inputs. So still not a great level of confidence in most of the key priority areas, with workforce planning being the lowest. Interestingly enough, we went back and looked at each quarter and the national trend line for each quarter. Q1 and Q2 are the red and blue lines, and they're nearly superimposed upon each other. And then we see a significant decrease in the last quarter. The trend line dropping down, there's a variance between 5 to 10% in almost every priority area.
They are the cumulative results too. So as more data inputs have gone in, the confidence is dropping overall.
So taking a look at this, we felt, this raised the question, which was there something about the timing of these reviews in the last quarter or the types of providers that may have influenced this drop in confidence? And to give you some context around that question, in the last quarter, there had been little communication from government between the end of December up to the beginning of March. Providers were really operating in an environment of a lot of unknowns. The pricing and accommodation guidelines have only just been recently finalized, and in that last quarter, it was 72 additional inputs into the system, and of those 72, over half were service providers providing residential services. So then we looked at the data again, and we broke it down by type, and we saw that we're actually covering equally residential, community, and ResCom providers, or mixed service providers, about 30% of each. And when looking at the outcomes, so in each priority area, their overall score and where they were benchmarking themselves the highest and benchmarking themselves the lowest. For residential care, benchmarking themselves the highest in senior leadership, lowest in workforce planning, with an overall score of 58%. And what you'll see, community, same thing. Scores vary a little bit, but the same priority areas are being marked high and marked low. Fairly same overall score, and the same for the mixed service providers. So what that's telling us is the provider type does not appear to impact on an organization's readiness for reform. When we looked at it by size, just to give you guys an idea of the proportion of each that we've done reviews for, majority are small, with small to medium, with large making up just a quarter of the inputs that we have. And for their trend lines across each priority area, and this is cumulative, so to date, interestingly, they're all following the same trend line. So they're all feeling confident in the same areas and least confident in the same areas, with workforce planning being the lowest, which is probably a no-brainer for most of the people.
Here's your
in this
new
room.
word. Bazinga.
Bazinga.
There's a surprise, workforce planning's the worst.
So, to take it back from Bazinga, the green trend line, if you look at that, those are medium providers. And what we thought was interesting is, well, why is it that medium providers are feeling the least confident across all priority areas? What is it about medium providers? Why are they scoring the lowest? Went back. Yeah. Are they too big to have the proximity to business operations, but too small to be well-resourced to respond to reform? It's a question we're posing to you. In terms of the small providers, if you look at the red line and the blue line, the red line is the small providers. The blue line is the national trend line. They are pretty much sitting at or above the national benchmarks across every priority area except risk and financial management. Is this because smaller providers bear more risk with funding changes and a user's pays framework due to their capacity to manage the changes to business operations? That was a mouthful.
So, we've got a question?
Yeah.
Can you tell us what is the difference between a small, medium, and a large provider?
Sure.
Sure.
So small is 99 FTE or less. Medium is 100 to 199. And large is 200 and above. And we also include in our large calculation those services that are part of a large organization but might be a facility out here with 10 people, because we just needed to make sort of a line in the sand
to
about
make sure
that.
the data was
Yeah.
clean to present it.
So you will get some skewing in that way. So we took a look then at, okay, is there a difference between for-profit and not-for-profit? And again, in general, following the same trend line, red being the for-profit, blue being the not-for-profit. But there were key differences to take a look at in 3 priority areas: strategic direction, senior leadership, and business development and communications. Where medium providers, according to this graph and the data we have, are expressing less confidence. And it's about a 10% difference. Katie and I sat there and said, well, why is it that for-profit providers are actually showing less confidence? Is this right? Is this data right? And then we took a step back, and of the 192 inputs, only 31 are from for-profit providers. So with only 31 of those for-profit providers, or 31 of the inputs being for-profit providers and 25 of those being small to medium, is this an accurate reflection across the industry? Are for-profit providers actually feeling less confident about the change, less confident about being prepared for reform?
Okay. So because we were presenting on data and we wanted to give you some meaningful take-home messages, we actually had to delve deeper then into the question sets in each of the 13 priority areas, because one of the things that I noticed particularly coming out of my region was a provider may have had an overall not a bad ranking, maybe up around 60%, 70% in a particular category area, but they were applying for a tailored grant in that category. But when you actually look deeper, and there might be 6 questions within that category, they might have scored 5 for 4 of those questions, but a 0 for 2, because 2 of them might have been around their IT capacity. And so you needed to actually dig a little bit deeper. So we've done that very briefly, but when we tried to cut the data and we looked at, well, okay, if someone hasn't got a good strategy and direction as an organisation, does that mean that it's going to influence something else potentially around risk and financial sustainability? There was no rhyme or reason to any which way we cut the data. So that's why we've provided you with those different data sets to just show it doesn't matter which way you look at it, the trend lines seem to follow the same pattern. There might be a 10 to 15% variance across particular types of categories, but you do need to sometimes look deeper at the questions that are on offer. So we then categorised the priority areas for you here, and obviously these are the 3 highest scoring questions came out of these 2 categories. So senior leadership scored 59%, which still isn't hugely confident. It's but that's the highest scoring benchmark at the moment across all the data. And learning and development. So the questions that scored the highest for senior leadership were that our senior management team understands what it is to be an effective leadership team and seeks to perform at that level. And the other question was our organisation has senior people in the right positions to lead us through change and reform. So we did have a little bit of a tongue-in question. 2 of the highest ranking questions are in that category. So providers believe they have the right people and they're striving to be effective work teams. And then we had a Sheldon moment. We said, could that be because it was actually the leaders of the organisation that participated in the review? Okay, breathe. Don't jump on me yet. We have very sensible Amy then stepping in and saying, well, hang on, actually a minute. The 2 questions in senior leadership weren't necessarily about skills, it was about teamwork and it was about those other things. And we have evidence from the consultation that went on in our sister project, which is the Leadership Capability Framework Development, that leaders said, we might be okay now, but we don't think we're going to be okay into the future. We've got to deal with the change. We've got to operationalise these things. We need more support. And so hence there's great justification for more leadership skill development across the industry. Then obviously the questions that scored the lowest out of all of the reviews, and there won't be any surprise again, workforce plan. So actually the three lowest scoring questions were all around workforce planning. So we did throw in the risk and financial management just to mix it up a little bit. The questions in workforce planning are, A, do you have a workforce plan? B, have you looked at it in the context of reform and identified skills gaps? And has it also been aligned to your strategic plan? So if there's not a workforce plan, it's unlikely that the other 2 questions, if they scored something, we also discounted that data, I'm sorry, because if you don't have a workforce plan, we couldn't see how it might be, linked to a strategic plan or to reform. In terms of the risk and financial management, it was about organisations actually having completed a comprehensive analysis on risk and its impact, and obviously that's a timing thing because there's been so much hold up with the government, with the election and with new guidelines being released. But I guess given our point is, given that this came from the National Workforce Development Fund, it was a project based on workforce planning. Workforce planning is still an issue.
Word of the day.
There's your bazinga. Okay. So this lovely lady also has a question. She's curious to know about the qualitative data because it's not just about numbers, and numbers only tell part of the picture. They don't actually capture necessarily the real feeling of what providers are doing, and they don't demonstrate either the really good work that providers are already doing. And so that does get captured in the final report when we're putting it together as business partners. You're actually able to capture all of the rich discussion that you have with the CEO through to, I've done reviews with 18 members of a senior leadership team, and those reviews take, all day plus. So what we did is we've created a Wordle. Now, I know some people in the audience have probably seen a Wordle before. Thank you. I'm getting my wind up. Others may not have seen a Wordle. So what we've done with the open text questions, particularly around what were the three areas of most concern to providers, is create a Wordle. And the more a word is mentioned, the bigger the word gets in the pictograph that we're about to pop up. So in the first quarter, so we actually had a teleconference last week with the BPs, and they were interested to see whether or not the confidence in those questions changed quarter by quarter when the inputs went in. So between July and September, this was where most providers were feeling concerned: workforce, consumers, care, financials in their funding, and change. They're the big areas. That was for that quarter. Now, this is not cumulative data, so the next bit's actually the next piece of the pie. So the Reform Ready reviews that were conducted in the next quarter, care and consumers are still there, funding and financials getting bigger, and the word impact pops in. And of course, that's a timing thing. CDC's reality, ACAR funding round started, and the pricing guidelines are still not finalised for res care, so everyone's starting to get more and more nervous. Then from January through to March, it's almost like people are kind of accepting that this is the new world, the big bang started. Funding and financials still there, it's still noisy, but workforce and actually accepting of that change and being able to get workforce ready becomes bigger. And isn't it lovely, consumers are still there. Through all of those slides, the consumer's still one of the largest and key features, but workforce equally. We then rolled that up overall, so now this is the cumulative slide of everything that's been said. And consumers and workforce are the biggest issues, but it's lovely to see care also coming back, making a big comeback at the end there. So in terms of the questions we've posed, and these are discussion points for later today, is, are smaller providers really more at risk with the funding changes? Are medium providers too big to have that close proximity but too small to be really well resourced with HR and finance and a lot of that back of house function? And do senior leaders in aged services feel really ready to actually deal with reform and have the skills to match?
So where to from here? Well, in terms of the data, we're still building the baseline, and we're still in the collection phase. So having a Sheldon moment here, logically the next step for the WIM program will be to, and excuse the techie language, normalize this industry data and perform various analyses to address the extent to which uptake of this intervention, change, and innovation has occurred. And in regards to the enterprises, on the other hand, of course they should be focusing on workforce planning.
Penny. Workforce planning, are you guys kidding? We've got all this other stuff. We've got to sort out pricing and funding and consumer-directed care and what our service model is going to look like and our profitability, and all of those things really sometimes sit well before workforce planning. So thank you for your patience. There we go. Oh, we got questions? Yeah, fire away now.
I just wanted to ask, when you were doing how people responded to what they thought about the reforms, did you correlate in their understanding of or their perception of the impact of reforms? So the knowledge of that, was that accommodation?
Yeah, absolutely.
And benchmarked against what they were feeling.
There's a number of questions that ask about different levels of the organisation.
Sorry, we can't.
Sorry.
I've usually got my big booming home voice on. Sorry, so the question was whether or not the impact of reform was understood within the organisation when we commenced with the reviews. Is that right? Have I captured that in my brain properly?
You have to have a benchmark measure against that to get an understanding of the accuracy against which you were measuring business response. Yeah.
So there's probably two components. that we can answer to that. So we ask them, it's a self-assessment process for a start. So the organisation need to honestly reflect and tell us what they understand reforms to be. And we ask that from the board's level right down to the volunteers level. So the question pops up in a number of ways throughout the review tool, depending on the level of the workforce that we're talking about. So the tool looks at governance, it looks at senior leadership, it looks at middle managers, it looks at volunteers and frontline workers. And so we ask that question. Now, in most instances, in my experience and from the data that we've seen, CEOs usually have quite a good grasp on what the reform is. Now, whether the board's well educated on that and the board understand it is a different matter. So I guess in reflection on the tool, that question actually asks that the CEO and the board have a good understanding, and in an evaluation phase or improving the tool, you'd split those two out, because in my experience I found that's been the case. In terms of actually looking at how whether we've got a point in time, what we understand now and what we understand later, we're talking now about the opportunity to go back to providers potentially and have them reassess. We've had time go on, we've had more clarity around some issues, and so some providers, should they choose to, maybe given through potentially activities of the extension, relook at themselves and actually test how they're feeling. So not necessarily a baseline to start with, but it's a self-reflection from them to actually pick from 0, 1, 3 or 5 what they know about reform and whether they've actually considered its impact on the organisation.
And I would, just to add to that, I would also argue this is the baseline data collection period. This is, we have literally had 12 months to implement a great deal of activity, and to get true meaning in an evaluation and measure impact, you need time. And we recognize that this is still that critical period where we are collecting the early information, the early perceptions, the early self-assessment, and hopefully we will see change 12 months from now, 18 months from now, if there's an opportunity to go back to see what the impact of this intervention has been and ongoing.
Yes, Matthew.
I'm Matthew Gillett from Workforce Council in Queensland. I was just wondering if there's, if we have any data on the kinds of responses or the topics that the responses relate to in terms of how organisations have spent their...
Oh, that's the next presentation, Matthew. You're premature. Are there any other questions? No. Okay. Ronnie's cutting it. Oh, hang on. We'll take one more.
I just wanted to know what the proportion, if you like, of community-based care providers, so home care providers, as opposed to residential providers.
It was about, I think it was 37, 35, 33, so they were all about 30% of the total portion of reviews that we've done.
So residential was 30%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then combined providers doing both residential and home care was 37. Yeah. Thank you. I stand corrected.
But if you want to, attack Katie and I at lunch, because we do have to get moving on with the other presentations and the next set of videos from our not-for-profit and for-profit providers.
Okay.